How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital.
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? Oh, I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the dystopia. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the dystopia. This is the final
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil dich heim in die Arbeit einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil dich heim in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil dich heim in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades! Welcome to Socialism Live, and it is not just any live socialism. We are doing a very, 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 very special live edition of Socialism Saturday today because Phillip and the people at Red May have returned. And Trendlin says, I cannot remember where the term Red May comes from. Well, I'll tell you where it comes from in this context, Trendlin. It comes from the revolutionary socialists out in Seattle, because every year during the month of May, the revolutionary socialists out in Seattle, led by the illustrious Phillip, Columbia graduate, of course, we found that out last year about Phillip, they put together a whole month of socialist programming for us. And this year, their theme is, there must be some way out of here. So I think it's actually like not a bad socialist theme. Red May is a month-long spree of red arts, red theory, and red politics based in Seattle. We gather in bookstores, movie theaters, bars, parks, cafes, alleys, and auditoriums to share in discussion and plot ways to forward a world world beyond capitalism. While we continue our annual collective hurdle over the wire of our capitalist horizon, now you can join us throughout the other 11 months of the year. And I really hope that Phillip does start doing content throughout the year, because honestly, when Phillip is on his game, Red May content is really good socialist content. And if you're in Seattle, by the way, if there is anyone in Seattle that is willing to go to a Red May event in Seattle, because they don't stream all the stuff they're doing, please get in touch with me and let me know. I have very specific events that I would like coverage at if we're able to pull it off. So if anyone in Seattle is willing to do that, I know you might not want to because you never, and if you don't want to, that's fine. I'm not asking for someone to do something they don't want to do. But if you're interested in going to a Red May event in Seattle, I can tell you which ones I would like people to go to, like, I don't know, maybe record them and stuff like that. But we are so lucky because Phillip broadcasts a lot of the Red May talks on YouTube live. And we happen to be on the cusp in but 7 minutes of the very first Red May talk of the year, broadcast live on YouTube, of course. Now, listen, I want to be very clear about this. When we watch other people's live streams, we do not go and disrupt their chat. We don't. I think it's acceptable to ask questions. I think it's acceptable to make comments that are relevant and appropriate for what they're talking about. But like, really, the goal of doing this live is, they don't like it when I do this. And so if someone doesn't like when I'm going to do something, but I can do it anyway, I'm probably going to do it anyway just because. Especially when they're socialists. Like, no offense, I like Phillip a lot. But Phillip is a communist, and therefore we are not on the same team. And so I'm still going to live stream his events when I'm able to, whether he likes it or not. And he doesn't like it. I know he doesn't like it, but that's okay. He's allowed to have his feelings about it. And I'm still allowed to do whatever I want to do. But the thing is, one of the reasons we want to do this is because this gives us the opportunity to go and ask real live socialist questions. The goal is not to shitpost in their chat. I want no one shitposting in their chat. Our goal is to ask them questions where we give them an opportunity to explain to us what they think and what they believe and what they're doing to organize, so that we can then get that on video and show other people. So I don't want to see any disruption in the chat. And if I see anyone from my chat causing problems in their chat, I'm going to tell you to stop once. And if you don't stop, I'm going to ban you from my chat. That's how seriously I take this. I don't want anyone causing problems. This is not about being a dick, okay? This is about learning and getting information. The talk we're going to be watching in about 5 minutes is called Capitalism's Grave, Neo-Feudalism, and the New Class Struggle. Where is capitalism headed? Jody Dean puts forward a bold and startling suggestion, analyzing tendencies manifesting themselves in different fields. New forms of vesselage, I don't know what that means, the becoming rent of profit, the hollowing out of the nation state, and the personalization of sovereignty. She argues that the contemporary world is heading towards neo-feudalism. Feudalism isn't just a metaphor, it's an operating system for the present. Politics and plunder thrive in the capital pursuit of profit, and many are bound to serve the few, coerced in a system of rents, destructions, and hoarding driven by privilege and dependencies. The question is, in a society of serfs and servants, how do we get free? So that is what we're going to be watching in about 4 minutes, guys. As a reminder, if you appreciate what I'm doing and you want to support it, I'm currently doing a membership drive for the Substack. It is my goal to get 400 new paying members in the Substack by the end of the summer. Very, very, very attainable goal. This is going to be our summer membership drive. And the reason you want to support me on the Substack is not just that you get access to a variety of perks, to include private unrecorded Zoom calls with me, to include access to our supporter Discord where we do movie nights on Sunday and Monday and generally hang out as well. You also get discounts in the Unwoke Art Store. And most importantly for this week, you get access to Spy Stream. Spy Stream is one of the best supporter perks because you get to come with us as we go inside live leftist trainings. And we did a Spy Stream just yesterday in which we got public school teachers in the state of Vermont openly admitting that they're not going to follow the Trump administration executive orders. They're going to do whatever the fuck they want. I literally have them on video saying this. I have them on video saying other things too. We watch this unfold live, and you get access to that when you become a supporter of my work on Substack for $8 a month, $80 a year. I really appreciate it. I'm 100% funded by you guys. You guys keep me in business. And so without your support, I can't do any of this. And I really want to be able to build up and reach that 400 new supporter goal, because I want to be able to do undercover work in the back half of the year, like in person, not just doing it digitally. I want to be able to do it in person. That costs money. And so if you guys don't fund my work, then I can't do it. It really is that simple, guys. This is how independent journalism works, for better or worse. I can't go places and go undercover if people are not funding and supporting the work. So definitely do that. Get access to the Spy Streams, get access to the Discord, get access to all those perks as well. And I'll show you things on the internet that no one else is showing you. I will show you what's happening in the real world that no one else is talking about. Also, as a reminder, there is going to be a book club coming up for my new book, one of my new books, The Communist Manifesto, A Revolutionary Fairy Tale. This is a dystopian fairy tale based on the Communist Manifesto. You can get it now on Amazon in paperback, just like this, and in Kindle. It is a really quick read. I mean, it's like a reasonable book, but it's definitely it's a quick read. You can read this in a day or two, very, very, very easily. This book is appropriate for all ages, and my vision for this book is, I would love to get this book taught in schools. I'm not actually joking about that. I think that this book is a great way to talk to younger people about communism in a way that they're going to be able to relate to more. This is a story. This is not a lecture. This is not a debunking. This is a story that illustrates real world dangers of communism. So it is a fairy tale. It is a fiction. It's a fictional story. But so many things in this have actually happened. And that was part of the point, was to demonstrate what actually occurs, not only in the uprising, the communist revolution, because the first half of this book is all about the communist revolution. The second half of the book is about what happens after the communist revolution, based on real world events, but written in a story that I think is pretty compelling, if I do say so myself. So we're doing a book club on it on May 21st. If you'd like to join the book club, go ahead, pick up the book now on Amazon. You can find the link over at redmenacepress.com, or just go right to Amazon and look for it, whichever works for you. Get the book, read the book, and then join us on Monday. I don't know if that's a Monday. I think it might be a Wednesday. May 21st, Wednesday, I'm pretty sure, at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and we will have a chat about the book. And I hope you guys enjoy it. And you can find out more information about that at decodetheleft.com/events, where you can find that event listed. And now we got to get back to Phillip. Got to get back to Phillip and the folks at Red May. I'm so excited. Red May last year kind of sucked, but Phillip really does seem to be back on his game this year. And you know what? Listen, we want Phillip producing socialist content for us. We want socialists putting what they believe all over the internet. That is what we want. That is part of the purpose of this, because our goal here is to actually learn from them directly what they think, what they believe, what their strategies are, things like that. And so the more these guys talk on the internet, I don't know why my computer's gone wonky all of a sudden, but there it goes. The more these guys talk on the internet, the more we learn about them. And that's just the way it goes. So remember, everyone, you are representing me in that chat. If you go over to their chat, be nice, don't disrupt things, ask good questions. I don't want to see anyone over there going, why are you guys engaging in capitalism if you're socialist? I don't want to see anyone doing that. We know why they're engaging in capitalism. The Communist Manifesto tells them they can engage in capitalism as long as their goal is to overthrow it. They also have to survive within the capitalist system, so they're allowed to engage in capitalism because they have to survive in the capitalist system in order to overthrow it. I don't want to hear anyone doing that shit. I don't want to hear anyone going, why don't you just move to Venezuela? Because they're not going to move to Venezuela because they want socialism here in America, because really socialism for them is a global endeavor. And so they think that if they get America to follow socialism, the rest of the world is going to follow socialism. They ain't moving to no socialist country like Venezuela because they already think that that's a failed attempt because it's not a global attempt, because socialist countries cannot exist amongst capitalist countries. That is what they believe. And so going over and being like, why aren't you moving to Cuba? It doesn't actually accomplish anything. It just makes us look like we don't know what we're talking about. We do know what we're talking about. We have studied these people intimately, and so we're going to ask them better questions. All right? Be better. Be better than the conservatives of the internet. I already got Bigfoot over there. I know who that is. I'm not going to say who that is. Phillip, we're waiting. Socialists just love it when I watch them live, by the way. They love it. It's like the best thing that's ever happened to them. Let me see. Who's here in the chat with me for Socialism Live while we're waiting? Let me know who's in the chat. We will still be doing Socialism Saturday tomorrow. Not tomorrow. What the hell am I talking about tomorrow? Tomorrow's Sunday. We're doing Socialism Saturday at 6 p.m. Oh my gosh. We're doing Socialism Saturday at 6 p.m. tonight. We're going to be watching a documentary about Emma Goldman because I feel like I need to learn more about Emma Goldman. Let's see. We got Bot here. Reagan's here. Paula's here. I think Judy's here. I saw her earlier. Yep. Benjamin. Jane's here. Cool. All the regulars. Are there any new people here that have never watched socialism with us before? Chris is here. My first actual day off in a month. First day off in a month, and Chris chose to spend it watching socialism with us. Green-eyed lady's here. Suzanne is here. DW is here. Welcome if you guys are new. Richard's here. If you guys are, just to warn anyone that might be relatively new to socialism, Red May can be, I'm just going to reload this to make sure they haven't started yet. Red May can be very, very wonky. Joseph is here. So Red May is, Red May tends to be a little bit more advanced socialism. Not all the time, but they do tend to be a little bit more wonky about it. So if you guys have questions about what they're saying, please feel free to ask them. And we'll be able to answer. Renan's here. But if Alexis is here, hey Alexis. But if you don't understand something they're saying, it's not you, it's probably them. Paula says, when will we know we watched a lot of too much of socialism? When you have no problem understanding anything these people say, you've probably watched too much socialism. I see Trendlin, I see your comment in the chat. Well, I don't see it under your blue account. I see it under a purple account. Did they ban you? Red May banned bot. Phillip. How rude, Phillip. Yeah, so how you know when you watch, so I think it's a good question of like how you know, like watching too much socialism, you become here's how you really know when you watch too much socialism. You become absolutely incapable of communicating with average conservatives who think they understand the left. Has anyone else had this happen? Where like you're trying to communicate with someone that's like pretends to be an anti-communist but doesn't understand the left at all, and they're talking to you about all this crazy shit, and you're like, no, bro, that's not what's going on. It's just about capitalism. Like it's all about everything's about capitalism. Like what are you even talking about? Like Gnosticism, like Satan, like this is not about any of that. It's about capitalism. And they look at you like you have three heads, and you're looking at them like they have three heads, except you're the one that's hinged into reality. Okay, we're getting started. Phillip. They just want live. So that's when you know you've watched too much socialism, is you actually understand the socialist, and everyone around you that claims to care about defeating socialism and communism, they don't understand. Is the sound down? I'm not hearing any sound. Phillip's getting his... Phillip!
Hey, everybody.
Phillip?
Welcome to Red May 2025, our 9th annual Carnival of Left Thought and Practice.
Phillip back in his kitchen again.
That we've lasted so long, but here we are.
Oh, good. Thank you, Reagan.
This year's festival is dedicated to the memory of our friend and comrade, Joshua Clover. If you look on the internet, you will find tributes and memories all over that confirm how beloved and essential Joshua was to so many people as a poet, a comrade, a militant, a rock critic, a Latinist. He was so many-sided, it's hard to sum him up, and it's hard to believe that he's not here. Joshua came to our first Red May, and looking through the tapes of it, I discovered something he said at the time that resonated with me at the moment, so I would like to read it to you. Joshua said, welfare, and this, by the way, is 2017, and it's the moment just after Trump has been elected. Welfare, unemployment protection, the things that are buying social peace are vanishing or gone. One way to think about Trump is as an experiment by the class of the masters to figure out how they can manage a changed circumstance. And they need to experiment to find out what a regime can look like that doesn't operate by a quasi-inclusionist liberal democratic mode. This will be only one of the experiments we will see. Other experiments will happen. They may be worse. And we are now living through another of these new experiments. And Joshua, I wish you were around to help us blaze the trail through Trump's new vengeful clusterfuck. But anyway, Red May says to you, Awe atque vale, hail and farewell.
Rest in peace, Joshua.
Okay, today, Capital's Grave, Neo-Feudalism, a panel inspired by a new book by Jody Dean, which has James Martell and Kai Heron on it as commenters. Jody, as you probably know, if you've been to Red May in the past, is an American political philosopher and professor in the political science department of Hobart and William Smith Colleges in New York State. Not only does she profess, but she practices politics quite actively. She's always in the front of almost everything that occurs. She's contributed to contemporary political theory, media theory, and feminist theory, notably with her theory of communicative capitalism, the online merging of democracy and capitalism into a single neoliberal formation that subverts the democratic impulses of the masses while valuing emotional experience over logical discourse. She's the author of, among other books, Blog Theory, Aliens in America, and what I call the Communist Trilogy, The Communist Horizon, Crowds and Party, and The Comrade. And of course, this latest book, Capital's Grave, Neo-Feudalism, and the New Class Struggle. Jody, welcome back to Red May.
Welcome, Jody.
Thank you so much, Philip. I'm really happy to be back. It was really moving but sad to hear you dedicate this year to Joshua Clover. Joshua was an incredible comrade, and it's a terrible shock. We should also, I think, be mindful that this is 575 days into Israel's most recent genocidal effort to ethnically cleanse Gaza.
True.
Over 52,000 Palestinians have been killed, and Israel is also actively bombing Syria and Lebanon. In the U.S., things are also quite grim. We've been in the last 100 days, but also even before, right? Because we saw how pathologically Zionist the Biden administration was, but we've been witnessing attacks on higher education, illegal kidnappings and deportations, including of U.S. citizens and green card holders, and especially of students who've been active in the struggle against genocide. In the last 100 days, we've also been seeing the dismantling of parts of the federal bureaucracy dedicated to research, health, medicine, science, culture, knowledge production. And and also dedicated to civil rights and to securing protections and benefits for the least well off. Even though none of us, I expect, are fans at all of the IRS and the FBI, we've also been witnessing deep cuts to them, especially in divisions
I am not
investigating
disappointed
tax
about
fraud and economic
cuts to
crime.
the IRS.
Just to keep
They should
adding
defund the entire
on to
IRS.
this litany of horrors, we can also note the kind of shocking conflict of interest involved in this whole weird Trump cryptocurrency operation. And
Yeah, that is
also
actually
we've seen
weird. I
Trump
agree.
using his power to try to force law firms to give him hundreds of millions of dollars in pro bono labor, and several law firms, important, big, famous law firms, have capitulated and agreed to do this. And all of this is in the interest of tax cuts, of enhancing the wealth and power of the billionaire class and tech lords, especially and most visibly Elon Musk, who not only benefits from over 12 billion in US government contracts, but who is also on his way to sweeping up all of the data collected in the Social Security Administration. So in sum, our present is characterized by a dramatic blurring of the legal and the illegal. We could also call the same thing a breakdown of the distinction between what's legal and what's illegal. We see a breakdown of the distinction between the economic and the political, of any separation between public and private interests.
Oh, good
And these
line,
breakdowns, right, these blurrings are what I talk about in Capital's Grave as the parcelization of sovereignty. And I get that term from Perry Anderson's
That was an
discussion of
iconic
feudalism.
stream.
But I see it as related to a present tendency where capitalism is turning itself into something else, into neo-feudalism. And before I go into the sort of nitty-gritty of neo-feudalism, I wonder if people, if y'all have noticed this kind of weird prevalence of terms like fealty and vassalage, like this sort of language is like in everyday language now.
No, it's not. It's really not, Jody. That's really not.
In 2024, the top 19 families in the United States increased their wealth by over $1 trillion. And so we have in this setting, this return to this language of fealty and vassalage. Even this week, a New York Times fashion article discussed Republican women's style choices in terms of their sartorial displays of fealty. Right after the election and up into the inauguration, there were countless articles that would talk about how tech lords were heading to Mar-a-Lago to bend the knee and kiss the ring. These feudal metaphors are in the air we breathe. They're part and parcel of nearly all descriptions of power in the age of Trump. But they're actually not all that new. They're speaking in a language that has been prevalent in tech for over a decade, a language of lords and serfs, powerful tech lords and us digital serfs who can't do anything without someone else taking a cut, endless rents, fees and fines. We're always on their land. I mean, not really land, right? Their servers, their virtual space, their property, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, because these are not really public spaces, right? These are private corporations that provide platforms for our interactions in exchange for which they take a cut. California labor leader Anthony Rendon said this clearly in a rally back during the attempt to block the passage of Prop 22. It's fucking feudalism all over again. And Rendon evoked an experience of unfreedom that is prominent these days, right? It's prominent in this language of fealty and servitude and digital serfs and new forms of serfdom, right? It's more, it refers to a kind of experience of unfreedom that talking about bosses and exploitation doesn't quite capture. And I call this neo-feudalism. Trump world's blatant use of state power for a personal gain and its concomitant feudal trappings aren't the cause of neo-feudalism, right? This all didn't start up with Trump. It's a symptom. It's a manifestation of underlying
Phillip thinks we're going to spam his chat when we're not.
So that's what I want to try to introduce today, and then we'll have responses from Kai Heron and James Martell, in light of the the larger argument I make in the book Capital's Grave. So let me try to talk a little bit about what this neo-feudal hypothesis is. I develop it in the book in two ways. First, as a way of linking political, class, spatial, and psychosocial developments so that we can see them as part of the same phenomenon, right? Namely, as the combined effect of 40 years of neoliberalism. So that's the first way, right? I'm just trying to link, so it's descriptive. I'm linking these four different aspects of the present. And then the second way is a way of designating
Phillip,
a
so
tendency
paranoid.
within capitalism where capital's own laws of motion come into contradiction with themselves and drive actions that are no longer recognizably capitalist. So let me say a little bit
Capitalism
more
drives
about each
actions
of
that are
these
not
two
capitalist.
ways
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
developing
Explain
this
yourself,
neo-feudal
Jody.
hypothesis. First, in light of this, 40 years of neoliberalism, I think about these effects in kind of four buckets. So first, politically, at the level of the state. This is where I'm drawing from Anderson and others to talk about the parcelization of sovereignty, or a shift from sovereignty to suzerainty. And this is where this falling away of the distinction between the economic and the political comes in. And it's also where we start to see a real kind of withering away of the idea of government of laws applicable to all, right? In general, the bourgeois idea of government in the state, as much as it wasn't ever realized, but the fiction or the ideal was that there would be government by laws and that these laws would in some way be applicable to everyone, that feudal privileges would fall by the wayside and we would have some kind of universal rule of law. Now, that was the ideal. Under neo-feudalism, it's not even, it's not an ideal anymore, right? Instead, what we have is a privatization of jurisprudence and a proliferation of individual contracts. This is like liberal legal theorists have been talking about this for a while in terms of these features of the privatization of public law. Some key examples are arbitration agreements. And you can see these arbitration agreements in lots and lots of labor contracts, but you also see them internationally as the conditions under which trade can be, under which trade is undertaken. So this first example is just to think about the rise of contracts over a general kind of law. Other examples, in addition to arbitration agreements, are special economic zones or even private security and military contracts. Instead of having kind of public armies or public security, there are widespread private arrangements here, whether or not those are of billionaires or of countries that are no longer relying on their own citizens, but instead on private military. So this is the first, set of political changes that I think about as the parcelization of sovereignty. And you can also think about it in terms of the privatization of public law. The second set of changes are in the terrain of social property relations or new lords and serfs. The idea here is that there's a very small small class of asset holders and a majority of workers in services. In high income countries, 70 to 80% of employment is in services. Most workers in Iran, Nigeria, Turkey, the Philippines, Mexico, Brazil, and South Africa are also in services. In China, 54.6% of GDP comes from services. And in India, 49.8% of GDP comes from services. So services are a widespread feature of the contemporary economy, and not just in high income countries, but more broadly. So the second set of developments that I'm thinking about as part of neo-feudalism involves these property relations where you've got a small class of lords and a broad sector of serfs. Third dimension is a kind of spatiality, which I understand as hinterlandization. And by that, I mean the ways that we have prosperous areas, like areas of concentrated wealth that are walled off or protected from largely desolate, dismantled, and disfavored peripheries, whether or not we are thinking about that internationally or within the US or even within specific cities where flourishing areas, it's like they suck up all of the resources and energy from the areas around them. Phil Neal describes this phenomenon of hinterlandization really well in his book Hinterland. And then the fourth kind of basket of attributes that I associate with neo-feudalism, I think about them affectively and as a kind of the rise of this sort of catastrophic anxiety. And this is our growing, maybe unbearable and unavoidable sense of being submersed in forces beyond our control, where everything is a threat and everything is overwhelming or exhausting. So our affective landscape is one of anxiety, fragmentation, shamelessness, and dependence. Put in Lacanian terms, our setting is characterized by the decline of symbolic efficiency or the fragmentation of the big other, such that there's no third space of a generally accepted meaning or common sense. So the atmosphere then is, in the Lacanian vocabulary, properly psychotic, right? There is the big other or the symbolic is foreclosed. And instead of this third space where some kind of meaning can be generated or accessed, what we have is images that are proliferating everywhere, that are circulating, that kind of try to cover over the absence of this third space of meaning. But they're always kind of they're always fragile, and they're always at risk. And so we feel kind of always fragile and always at risk, never ever to kind of secure ourselves in some kind of place, some kind of symbolic order. So neo-feudalism then I offer as a descriptor that links these elements of the present into a single formation. I also give a more theoretical account of neo-feudalism as a tendency. And so this is what I want to move to now. So we first got this general description of these four aspects, but now I want to move into the kind of more of the logic of neo-feudalism. And the idea is that capital's laws of motion are coming into contradiction with themselves. So I'm arguing that capitalism is bringing itself down. Right? Capitalism is coming into contradiction with itself in ways that are that make it no longer recognizably capitalist, or increasingly hard to recognize as capitalist. Here, my argument differs from those of Yanis Varoufakis and Mackenzie Wark, both of who say capital is dead. That's not my view.
She only listens to other
My view is that capitalism is in the process of transforming and changing itself.
How?
So let me say a little bit more about this.
Yeah.
As Ellen Meiksins Wood argues, capitalist accumulation compels a specific set of behaviors or strategies, namely competition, improvement, and profit. We are in a period of transition where the imperative to accumulate is compelling different strategies, not competition, improvement, and profit, but hoarding, destruction, and rents within a general setting of extra economic coercion, privilege, and dependence. Now, of course, destruction has always accompanied capitalist production. My argument is that it's increasingly a compulsion rather than a side effect. For example, investors raid and dismantle functioning firms. Tech startups demolish entire sectors. Cryptocurrency mining operations consume enormous amounts of energy while making nothing at all. It's like imperialism reflexivized or turned in on itself. So the economy is one of predation, rents, and services, taking, not making, as Brett Christopher says in his analysis of rentier capitalism. Now, I expect more of this is going to come up in the discussion. So I want to end my remarks by highlighting two of the assumptions that guide my account of neo-feudalism, and then briefly say what I think the payoff is, or what we gain, and why I think everyone should agree with me and think this is a really great idea. Okay, so first, so these two kind of guiding presuppositions. The first, capitalism is not immortal. It had a beginning and it will have an end.
When was the beginning?
Capitalism will have an ending, and its ending can take a long time, right? Already Lenin, like over 100 years ago, looked at imperialism as moribund capitalism. So capitalism's death, it can be a long, slow death, and this is what transition is, right? The long movement from one state to another state. The transition to capitalism took centuries, and absent a revolution, transition can really take a very, very long time, right? We don't know how long the transition out of capitalism will take, right? For the longest time, the left thought about it in terms of a revolution and saw it on the horizon. That's not happened. So it's decay, it's death, it's transition into this thing that's worse than capitalism, can also take a very long time. Additionally, we have to recognize, as we're talking about transition, and as I emphasize in Capital's Grave,
no, Philip's fucking
during
around.
transition, or while we're in a transition period, the same elements can be theorized according to different logics, right? You can put them into different pictures. It's like transition is a realm of like duck rabbits, waves, and particles, right? Or Schrodinger's cat, right? What are we looking for? And so what we're looking for is going to determine how our picture looks. So at any rate, my argument here is that capitalism is not the end of history. It is not some kind of infinitely adaptable mode of production, but that it can compel logics that are non-capitalist and devolve into something recognizably non-capitalist, and that this devolution or transition can take a long time. Second assumption that's or presupposition of my argument for neo-feudalism is that different modes of production can and do coexist. I want to remind everyone of the opening line of Capital. The wealth of societies dominated by the capitalist mode of production appears in the form of an enormous accumulation of commodities. Notice, dominated, which implies, the wealth of societies dominated by the capitalist mode of production. Dominated implies the coexistence of other modes. I argue that in our time, capitalism is no longer dominant, or is losing its dominance. Rentierism, finance, and services are generating an accumulation regime increasingly disconnected from making and dependent on taking and on servicing the takers. Okay, so those are these suppositions. I want to end then by kind of saying very briefly, and I hope we can talk more about this later, very briefly, the payoff. It's been widely noted that class has lost its prior capacity to serve as a political identity, right? Badiou says somewhere that class has become saturated. Other identities, ethnic, racial, gender, religious, national, these have entered to fill in the gap, even as none of them can actually name a politics, right? None of them can tell us what the politics is of someone who speaks under that name. So there's been a lot of argument, particularly on the left, a lot of argument and debate around class and identity politics, but the class side rarely pays sufficient attention to why class has lost its prior power. I mean, there was a time during the kind of period of the new class, right, back in the 70s and 80s, when there was more attention to that. But I think in some ways we've kind of lost that thread for a while, and we are not paying sufficient attention.
People in the chat think I want their opinion. I'm like, no, I don't actually care what you have to say.
Power. It's probably generally accepted that this is an effect of working class defeat, right, of neoliberalism, of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the decline of unions. My wager is that there's a further explanation, one that's tied to the rise of services.
Why does that guy look like Trotsky?
Wage laborers. They no longer see their work.
What the fuck, Robert?
They aren't producers. They're servants. servicing the needs of the better off. But we can and should recognize services as leading the way to the kind of economy we'll need on a warming planet, right? An economy of services, care, education, health, environmental restoration. So Capital's Grave makes the case for hailing service workers as the vanguard of this class struggle on a rapidly warming planet. The demand is for universal basic services as the accompaniment to the abolition of private property. So we need to stop pretending that industrial labor is in the same position it was a century ago. We have to stop languishing in some kind of melancholic defeatism. And we have to see service work as the way that communism and economies based on need for the benefit of people on the planet can be possible and realizable, and how we can fight for it. So that's my pitch for the neo-feudal hypothesis.
The abolition of private property,
the vanguard role of the service sector, and make the argument in Capital's Grave. And now we're going to hear from my dear friends and comrades who have some critical responses and questions. And we'll turn first to Kai Heron. Kai is an organizer, trade unionist, and lecturer in political economy at political ecology at Lancaster University. He's a co-author of the forthcoming book, Radical Abundance, How to Win a Green and Democratic Future, which is going to be published later this year by Pluto. I'm also really happy to have Kai here because we have worked on a couple of articles that we've published together under the general heading of Climate Leninism. So we'll turn it over to you, Kai, and thanks so much for giving up your evening to join us.
Yeah, the time zone is wild. So hi everybody, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, partly to discuss Jodie's book, Capital's Grave, because it's a wonderful book. But it also marks the first time that I've spoken at a Red May panel. And I always, every May, I excitedly go through the YouTube channels and watch these, right? And it's just one less video I need to watch because I don't need to watch myself, which is wonderful. So my comments are going to be posed as two sets of questions to the book and to Jodie. Some of these, Jodie, I think you've preemptively answered, which is great. But the first set of questions will be around some of the elements of the neo-feudal hypothesis and asking whether we are, in fact, in a period of transition from capitalism to something worse, or whether we instead inhabit a newly ruinous stage in global capitalism's stranglehold over human and non-human life. And then the second is going to reflect on how neo-feudalism should shape revolutionary practice today. And my aim is to think with and alongside the neo-feudal hypothesis, testing it, trying it out. Before any of that, though, I want to start by applauding Capital's Grave for doing what all good theories should do. It theorizes from the state of the world as we find it to say something powerful, provocative, and politically salient. While rereading Capital's Grave for the panel, I was reminded of a quote from Gramsci, and it's not the usual one about transitions in which he says that the old is dying and the new cannot be born, because Jodie is emphatic that the new is being born, that it is bursting forth, though incoherently and incompletely, from the carcass of capital. Instead, I was reminded of Gramsci's remarks that, quote, reality produces a wealth of the most bizarre combinations. It is up to the theoretician to unravel these in order to discover fresh proof of their theory, to translate into theoretical language the elements of historical life. It is not reality which should be expected to conform to the abstract schema. This will never happen. And hence, this conception is nothing but an expression of passivity. Neo-feudalism is just such a bizarre combination. It is a tendency, a law of motion, as Jodie just explained, within capital's social metabolism that exceeds it. It is the end of capitalism, not because workers have won, but because in many respects they have lost, defeated by the combined forces of imperial aggression, a constantly mutating international division of labor, and capital's sheer political and economic might. But it's also the end of capitalism because of capital's weaknesses, its proclivity, we might say, to self-sabotage, its imminent self-undermining tendencies. If the neo-feudal hypothesis is correct, then capital created a world in its image before buckling under the weight of its own contradictions, becoming something other, becoming neo-feudal. Nothing like the feudalisms in the plural of old, nothing like capitalism, something new, something strange, a bizarre combination, as Gramsci put it. But I was also reminded of this passage because it encapsulates the way Jodi theorizes in the book. Following Mackenzie Walk's lead, Jodi poses the question of whether capitalism might be dead or dying. She doesn't approach the emergent historical tendencies with an abstract scheme of capital's laws of motion. She doesn't try to force the existing world to conform to a theory. Each new social development, each new procedure of rental extraction, plunder, and destruction isn't made to fit into accepted Marxist wisdoms about how capital functions. Instead, they're probed for signs of the emergent. Capital's grave then considers what new monstrosities might be waiting for us over the horizon, what inklings of new modes of production might exist in the here and now. And that is exactly, I think, what Marxist theory, which must always be revolutionary theory, should do. Marx theorized industrial capital not when it was at its apogee, but when it was still incipient and ascendant. Grasping for the shape and form of what is emerging enables us to theorize what is essential about a specific social formation from its beginning. It also enables us to plan, to organize, to fight, and hopefully to win. So for all those reasons and more, I think Jodi's book is an incredibly important contribution to contemporary theory. But precisely because Capital's Grave is theorizing something new and something incomplete, after finishing it, I was left with a couple of questions, not quite fully convinced by the neo-feudal hypothesis, but not persuaded that it was incorrect either. So in the time that I have, I'm going to focus on two sets of questions. The first relates to the distinct laws of motion that Capital's Grave asserts pertain to neo-feudalism. And I want to approach those through the centrality of service work. And then the second line of questioning, which will follow quite logically from the first, is the question of how Capital's Grave may aid revolutionary activity. Okay, so service work. Service work features heavily in the book, as Jodi just explained. Capital's Grave follows many contemporary Marxist theorists and political economists in noting the dramatic rise in service sector employment globally. Jodi agrees with those like Aaron Benanav, who have argued that the rise of service work can be explained by capital's need to absorb surplus labor that is no longer required in the industrial sector because of productivity increases. But Capital's Grave goes further by arguing that service work is increasingly non-capitalist in form. Service work is in the process of becoming serf work. Or Jodi puts it, capitalism is turning itself into a neo-feudal order.
If you're a waiter, then you're now a serf.
And a massive
if you're a bartender
servants.
or a barista, you're now a serf.
This theorization of service work is critically important for Capital's Grave because it is here that Jodi poses the question of capital's laws of motion. And
then why is Trump doing no taxes on tips?
So as Jodi just explained, following E.M. Wood, Capital's Grave argues that capital's laws of motion are competition, accumulation, profit maximization, and increasing labor productivity, all of that compelled by impersonal market forces and market dependency. While neo-feudalism's laws of motion are characterized by rent-seeking, predation, hoarding, and destruction, this time compelled not by the impersonal force of the market, but rather by extra economic coercion. But there may be some ambiguities in how service work is approached in Capital's Grave, especially around the question of to what extent contemporary service work does or does not contribute to capital accumulation and the broader reproduction of capital. If it does contribute to the reproduction of capitalism, it can't be neo-feudal, it's capitalist. If it doesn't, we can be approaching the facets of an emerging neo-feudal order. And part of the problem here is trying to think in this moment of transition in the way that Jodi just explained. But in the book's conclusion, Jodi writes, capitalism's reliance on services is contributing to its becoming neo-feudal, precisely because care and reproduction can't be fully technologized, precisely because technological development results in an ever larger sector of servants, precisely because caring for people comes up against real limits with respect to efficiency. A society of servants cannot be a capitalist society. Services require that we think in terms of their use value, not their exchange value. Lots of this makes sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all, actually.
Teaching fully. We can't have robots teaching our kids, right? And
you can
these
actually have robots teaching your kids, so it'll probably be better.
Increases in profitability achieved through the maximization of what Marx called relative surplus value. But I'm a little less clear about the passage's final sentence, which runs, services require that we think in terms of their use value, not their exchange value. This resonates with other claims in the conclusion that services are, quote, disconnected from capital accumulation, and a little later that they challenge the value form. And these passages then cleave use value from exchange value, asserting that service work has the former, but that it increasingly lacks the latter. This claim is necessary for the neo-feudal hypothesis, but it's not always self-evidently the case in all parts of the service sector. Part of the issue, as Capital's Grave acknowledges, is that the service sector is a huge and internally differentiated space. Services encompasses everything from care work and education to public sector employees like civil servants, all the way over to high finance. So the so-called service
Are they
sector,
saying
as
everyone is a
presented in
service
bourgeois
worker?
economic data, spans from some of the lowest paid workers to functionaries of the state to some of the highest paid.
They're literally saying the proletariat are all service workers now.
Importantly, when Capital's Grave theorizes about the emergence of a vanguard service class, it has in mind the lower paid service worker and sector jobs, including Uber drivers, teachers, nurses, social care workers, shop assistants, and so on, and obviously not state employees and high finance. Even so, I think what really matters for the neo-feudal hypothesis isn't the kind of work that's being conducted, let's say for the sake of argument care work, but the social form that that work takes, which is to say that the question isn't whether someone is doing care work or not, but whether their work is productive of surplus value that is to be reinvested as capital in a circuit of expanded reproduction. It is this that is specific to Capital's laws of motion. So as Marx puts it, such labor is productive as directly valorizes capital or produces surplus value. Or in another useful phrase, productive labor is labor which directly serves capital as the agency of its self-valorization as the means of the production of surplus value. So whether care work, for instance, does or doesn't generate surplus value isn't really answerable in the abstract, but it depends on the specifics of each instance. It depends on the laws of motion at work. So if a person looks after their own sick mother in their free time, that doesn't produce exchange value. They're just using their unwaged labor to care for somebody. If a person pays somebody else to look after their sick mother out of their wage or consumption fund, though someone's now formally employed in the service sector, their work doesn't generate surplus value. But if a person starts a business employing others to do care work, including caring for their sick mother, and reinvest some of the profits they receive into their business to engage in expanded reproduction of capital, then they are employing productive labor. So in every case, we have the same content, the same concrete labor is being done, but a different form, different laws of motion. So that leads to the conclusion that whether or not work is productive in the sense of contributing to the expanded reproduction of capital is decisive for whether it can be considered capitalist labor or otherwise. Bourgeois economic data doesn't disaggregate for whether work is productive or unproductive. But I think for the neo-feudal hypothesis to hold, it would need to be demonstrated that an increasing number of workers are involved not just in the service sector in an expansive sense, but first, that an increasing number of workers are engaged in distinctly unproductive forms of service work. And indeed in other kinds of work, perhaps that is also unproductive from the perspective of capital. That would distinguish service work from normal service work under capitalism from work as a servant. And then second, that the neo-feudal laws of motion predicated on this unproductive labor can and are beginning to cleave themselves away from capital's laws of motion and stand on their own 2 feet. So put differently, it has to be shown that the increasing use of unproductively deployed labor is not a part of contemporary capitalism, say as a way of absorbing surplus populations to suppress working class unrest, but is the dawn of a new and distinct mode of production with its own laws of motion. So that point is critical. If rent-seeking, plunder, and destruction can generate their own forms of production, their own distinct social metabolism, as Istvan Messeros would put it, then they can become the basis of a new dominant social formation that we might call neo-feudalism. If, however, they are not just an outgrowth from capitalist production, but strictly speaking parasitic on it, then to treat them as a distinct and new emergent social formation may be to misapprehend the contradictions of contemporary capitalism. The question Capital's Grave poses then is whether capitalistically unproductive labor and rent-seeking organizations of labor like Uber and similar platforms are not only becoming more common, but becoming determining of our collective reproduction today in the same way as the production of commodities was or is determining under capitalism. As the book's wonderful chapter on transitions argues persuasively, and as Jodi's just reiterated, capitalist and neo-feudal laws of motion can coexist and interpenetrate. But I want us to consider whether neo-feudal laws of motion are in fact beginning to oust capitals, to borrow a phrase from Preobrazhensky. Right, okay. So those comments are all precursors to 3 questions, and then I'm going to pivot and think about revolution, and that'll be the end of my part. So first, the book's conclusion makes a brief but important mention of the difference between productive and unproductive labor. It said that the coexistence of capitalist and neo-feudal laws of motion point to the ways that the same labor process may follow different laws of motion. Service labor may be reproductive, but not productive, more likely remunerated out of consumption funds than consumed as part of production. So that's what I've been contending is essential to consider, not only in services, but across the whole range of social activity. So I think the question becomes whether consumption funds are, generally speaking, the product of capitalist or neo-feudal laws of motion. So I want to think together today about whether the distinction between productive and unproductive labor, rather than necessarily just service work as such, is an important thing to consider when we try to deepen our understanding of how neo-feudalism might be emerging. Second, a fine-grained analysis of how transition may be occurring is one of Capital's greatest strengths. And I was especially taken with the book's use of Harutunian to think about variegated and uneven temporalities of Capital's formal subsumption of pre-capitalist social systems, and how a similar formal subsumption may be occurring in the transition towards neo-feudalism. But I wonder how that kind of analysis sits alongside the book's notion of the social manner, which, as I understand it, is extrapolated from Panzieri, Tronti, and Negri's concept of the social factory. For me, at least, the problem with the social factory thesis was always that it subsumed all social activity under capitalism. It totalized the capitalist system, obscuring how it harbors non-capitalistically organized productive and reproductive activities.
The social factory.
And blinding us to the differences between productive and unproductive labor that I think are so important. It's a theory of generalized full subsumption, essentially. So I wonder if there's a productive tension between this and the use of Harutunian and what the category of a social manner can tell us about the world. And then third, what evidence is there that neo-feudalism's laws of motions are carving themselves away from capitalist ones? That's kind of the point I've reiterated. Okay, that's most of my time. I think I have a couple of minutes left. So I want to think now about what it means to fight for revolution under neo-feudal conditions. And Jodi's already argued a lot of this in the plea for service work being the space where we think about revolution and struggle. So Capital's Grave concludes by considering how servants and serfs will fight for communism. And the book argues powerfully that the rise of low-paid service work elevates political struggles around social reproduction. So under neo-feudalism, the struggle becomes about securing basic conditions for social and ecological life. And in line with her previous writings, Jodi argues that these conditions won't be secured through local initiatives to recommon, through mutual aid programs and so on. We need a revolutionary party. Which makes me wonder how the struggle to build the party to dismantle the state and abolish private property differs under neo-feudalism. The book's conclusion proposes that service workers are the vanguard of revolutionary change and nicely demonstrates the challenges of organizing in workplace struggles around the service sector.
Workplace struggles,
much more likely
they're using the workplace to organize.
The servant vanguard will organize outside of the workplace in, as Jodi just mentioned, the hinterlands abandoned by capital, where class struggle takes the form not of a labor struggle, but a social reproduction struggle. And Jodi gives examples of rent strikes, cost of living demonstrations, protests against raising retirement age, and then repertoires of struggle in the hinterlands like blockades and sabotage. I think all of this is great and a really massive contribution. So my only questioning here is, first, what would this mean against struggles against imperialism, neo-feudal, or if we're living in a neo-feudal order, what does the struggle against imperialism look like? Does it look different? And second, how might we think about the convergence of the ecological crisis and neo-feudalism? So as James O'Connor argued, capitalism destroys the means of our collective reproduction and its own conditions of possibility. Neo-feudalism is surely doing the same thing. But how might the ecological crisis with neo-feudalizing tendencies specifically, what spaces of proactive and defensive struggle will be created or have already been created, and why? And here I'm thinking about things like how will wildfires, floods, droughts, declining productivity caused by heat stress, the forced displacement of populations, how will all of that collide with neo-feudalism's laws of motion, and what kinds of struggles might emerge? And then on the subject of imperialism, how will the intensification of imperial war, death and dying that we are witnessing globally be reshaped if neo-feudalism succeeds in ousting capitalism? What strategies of anti-imperialist action are most necessary in response? And with that, really my question is, what is to be done under neo-feudalism? So thank you, and I'll leave it there.
Wow, that was amazing, Kai. It was thank you so
Stunning
much.
and brave,
Those are
Kai.
also really hard
Stunning and
questions, but I
brave.
really appreciate the
Stunning and
analysis.
brave.
And we're going to turn now to my old friend, long friend, dear friend, and comrade James Martell, who I should say, James and I were in February, we're planning to have dinner with Joshua. And we had been like, doing all the emails, and then kind of right before it didn't work out, Joshua was having some health challenges. And we were like, okay, well, we'll get together next time. And there wasn't a next time. So James with Joshua's also really stood by me last year and I'm greatly appreciative of that, James. So I want to now, but not enough about that. James teaches in the Department of Political Science at San Francisco State University.
Oh, yeah?
He's also a labor and union organizer.
Of course.
He is the author most recently of Anarchist Prophets, Disappointing Vision, and the Power of Collective Sight. That's one of his many books, another of which is one of my favorites, The Misinterpolated Subject. James is working right now on a new book entitled Continuous Assembly, The Power and Promise of Non-Archism. So James, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And over to you.
Thanks so much, Jody. So nice to see you all. I just also wanted to kind of give a shout out to Joshua Clover. I'm very sad and moved by his passing, and he was a real comrade and a real mensch.
Rest in power,
and the world
Joshua.
Is worse off without him. So
he was a mensch.
I'm actually going to talk about him a tiny bit at the end of I have a question that's related to him, so we'll bring him back. And thanks for the invitation. I'm very excited to be on Red May. I've always kind of always wanted to be on it, so this is great. So let me give some remarks, and then I have also 3 questions for Jody. Capital's Grave is a book that we all should pay attention to. I think liberals should pay attention to it too, but since this is Red May, I want to focus on what leftists can take from this important book. This book makes several really critical interventions that are vital for understanding our time and what we're facing. And I think what Jody has accomplished here is what Antonio Negri spoke of as a Marxist analysis of Marxism. That is to say, she's engaged in Marxist forms of analysis to conceptually stretch Marxism to adapt it to our current moment. This has been done many times before, of course, by Negri himself, but also by applying Marxism to context in the global South, as we see with people like Fanon and Mariátegui, to give just 2 important examples. In Capital's Grave, Jody may be appearing to stretch Marxist concepts beyond the limit of what is still recognized.
This is a lot more wonky than usual.
And I take it that quite a few Marxists are having some issues with this book.
It takes some more
what I want to emphasize here is, rather than dismissing the book, Marxists of all stripes, as well as anarchists and other people on the far left.
I'm sure he's going to say something deeply important, but I want to say to people, if you're new to socialism and this all sounds like it's like word salad, it's because you don't speak their language yet. That's not shade to you. This is extremely advanced. And so my best advice for new people is that you just relax and just listen to the language. And if you have specific questions in the chat, we'll try to answer them. But it's definitely more advanced than usual.
Normally, this would be really good news. This is what we've been fighting for well over a century, after all. However, here we are at one version of the end of history, and there's still no communism. The idea that it's capitalism or nothing is itself, I think, an offshoot of the way that capitalism has successfully insinuated itself into our sense of reality, so that, as Mark Fisher put it so well, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism itself. Well, the world, at least one version of it is ending, and here we are. I think that what Jody shows us is not the limits of Marxism, but as with Negri, Fanon, Mariátegui, and so forth, how capacious and adaptive Marxist analysis can and must be. Jody's thesis is not that capitalism has entirely disappeared, but rather that the patterns of capitalist logic, which she, after Marx, calls its laws of motion, no longer sustains capitalism as our central mode of operations. That is to say, capitalism's main drives, to use some of Jody's own Lacanian-influenced language, have now produced a new, now neo-feudal order. And Jody's very precise about how this works. Quoting Ellen Meiksins Wood, she says that the capitalist laws of motion include, quote, the imperatives of competition and profit maximization, a compulsion to reinvest surpluses, and systematic and relentless need to improve labor productivity and develop the forces of production, unquote. Jody shows how competition can lead to conquest, not just monopoly. Reinvestment of surplus can lead to hoarding, and the need to improve labor productivity can lead to the deindustrialization and the shift to a service-based economy. This is what Jody means when she says that capitalism is digging its own grave. One of the really important points in this book is the way that Jody shows how dialectical materialism actually works in history. The stereotype is that one order, say feudalism, comes and is vanquished entirely, being subsumed by capitalism. In fact, however, capitalism kept many features of feudalism. In fact, it not only keeps them, but it relies on them to function. One key example of this can be seen in the way of how capitalism has dealt with the global South. There, as Mariátegui tells us, speaking specifically of Peru, feudalism was actually imposed by various imperial powers from Europe and the global North, beginning with Spain. Feudal structures of extraction were, and in many cases remain, the norm throughout the period of capitalist rule. And even in the context of the global North, however, Jody shows how many feudal structures remain intact and central to the functioning of capitalism itself. As she puts it, quote, "Formal subsumption is the bringing of old forms under new logics," unquote. Some of the main drives of capitalism, rent-seeking, predation, expropriation, are extrinsic to capitalism itself. Indeed, if capitalism only followed its own laws of motion, it would not be able to succeed as well as it has, because that self-generating engine of development must have underneath it theft, plunder, and domination. If it was just reinvestment, it wouldn't be able to conquer the world. In other words, and I think this is one of Jody's really great points, capitalism was never not feudal, and also never could have been anything else. One way that I found Capital's Grave to be very useful then is that it helps explain what's going on right now in the US in particular.
Oh, yeah?
Here at the heart of capitalism's empire, we see what looks like an attempt to dismantle the state, at least in part, and also it would seem to wreck or at least destabilize the market with all of Trump's shenanigans and clusterfuck, I think is a great word for that.
What?
To me, Jody's analysis shows what this is. This is basically a case where capital has more or less run out of places to exploit in the global South and is now cannibalizing the global North instead. What might look like wanton self-destruction, Brexit, Trump, etc., is actually an example of unfettering some of the feudal modes implicit in formal subsumption, so that they reduce and eventually eliminate vast segments even of the bourgeoisie, leaving only a tiny elite and a vast number of vassals and dependents. What then should we call this particular moment that we're in? This does not appear to be fascism, although I say it's fascism all the time, but which remains very much a part of the capitalist form of homeostasis. You could call fascism welfare state for white people, a partial use of the state to temper capitalist accumulation to stave off precisely leftist insurrection.
What?
That's not what's going on right now, although there are plenty of fascists like Steve Bannon who would like nothing more than to do that. It also does not appear to be just another version of liberalism. Neoliberalism, in retrospect, could be seen as itself being a transitional form from capitalism to something else, something worse. It makes sense to me to think that this moment is a type of neo-feudalism, which is dispensing with social welfare altogether and substituting for that a form of radical dependency where vassals are only sustained and nurtured by their personal ties to their superiors, a form of affiliation that's very much in keeping with Trump's way of doing business, as well as Putin's, Xi's, Erdogan's, Modi's, and so forth. One of the reasons that this book produces alarms for many Marxists is the idea that capitalism needs to be completed, taking that term from Harry Hartunian, in order to allow for communism. If capitalism never fully takes over, then maybe we could never have communism after all. But to think in this way is to engage in a kind of teleological logic that dispenses with a central aspect of Marxist theory as a whole. Dialectics do not work by eliminating one character, but only by changing it as it gets swept up into a new one. For this reason, capitalism itself will not entirely disappear, and obviously that's not good news. It too will become part of the model of formal subsumption and be redeployed for the use of the neo-feudal elite, just as feudal elements will also remain transformed in and by this new context. Jody is very clear that neo-feudalism is not the same as feudalism. Indeed, neo-feudalism is in effect a worst of both worlds situation, and in fact adds a few features of its own that makes it quite a bit worse than either of its predecessors. From feudalism itself, it gets what Jody calls extra economic forms of coercion. Under capitalism, these forms are often presented by the state, but as with feudalism itself, they can come from all sorts of private and limited micropowers. It also adopts some of feudalism's own laws of motion, and keep in mind that feudalism never went away entirely, so it's not a matter of reviving long-dead practices, but only of bringing these ongoing practices into greater and new prominence. As Jody puts it, neo-feudalism engages in taking, not making. It also retains many of the features of an ongoing capitalism as well, the ongoing presence of the market mechanism being one key example. But the market works differently under conditions of neo-feudalism. One way to understand this is by thinking of the various and entirely false sense of freedom that you get in each mode of production. In feudalism itself, a peasant or a serf pretty much knows they aren't free, but they are suspended in webs of obligation that may offer some benefits. Under conditions of capitalism, those benefits were removed, but the worker was told that she was free because she was paid a wage. She gets to choose her own housing and provide for herself and for her family. This so-called freedom is actually a form of a new and deeper level of subjection. And this is one example of how a feudal element can not only remain operative under capitalism, but actually intensify. Then there's neo-feudalism. Jodi's reading of Uber in the book is a perfect illustration of what this new form of so-called freedom entails. The Uber driver, unlike the worker in a factory, is even freer in the sense that she has no boss and does not get paid a wage. Furthermore, she actually is herself a possessor of capital, in this case, her car. The Uber driver, and Uber has spent millions of dollars to ensure that this remains the case, is not an employee. She is a self-employed entrepreneur who controls her own time, her own life, and even her own capital. Why is it then that being an Uber driver sucks? It's because the so-called freedom is even less free than the supposedly free market.
Wow.
What neo-feudalism has done is to shift the burden of maintaining and running capital to the worker herself. She is thus doubly unfree, fully responsible for the wear and tear of her mode of production, even as she is immiserated by the expropriation of the value that this produces.
These people have no idea
this
what
whole
it means
process
to own a
reminds
business.
me of an earlier time when neo-imperialism, that is to say the mode that is predominated with the rise of the United States, realized it did not have to fully control the countries that it dominated as previous empires like the British had done.
You have to keep up the things you used to
It
run
could
the
transfer
business?
all of the hassles and costs
Yes.
of rule to those countries themselves and instead take from it what it wished with the collusion of a local elite. Like neo-imperialism, neo-feudalism saves the boss a lot of money and hassle. That is all borne now by the worker who's no better off, in fact worse off, for having access to the means of production. In this way, Wallerstein's world systems theory has come home to roost in the global north. And this, I think, is an example that neo-feudalism's origins may be much earlier than the 70s. Maybe the rise of the US empire was already setting that up. For those of you who are getting depressed about what seems like a very bleak outlook, Jodi has an answer for that too. She argues that there's something inherently subversive about the service economy. And here, maybe in some element of the old feudal economy remains to potentially redeem and uproot neo-feudalism. Care for human bodies and needs has always been a kind of afterthought in capitalism. It's unfortunate from a capitalist perspective that human beings have to eat and sleep and go to the bathroom. It's also unfortunate that they need some kind of life beyond work. Capital's solution has been to give them as little of these things as possible, just enough to eat, horrible living quarters, limited bathroom breaks, if any, and virtually no free time or time to sleep. Under neo-feudalist conditions, we are approaching the early days of capitalism with Dickensian living conditions becoming more of a norm. Just check out conditions in an Amazon distribution center if you want to see how bad things have gotten. But human needs do not go away, and even the ultra-rich have bodies and needs, although I know they're trying to do away with those things by freezing their heads when they die and drinking Soylent instead of food and all that. So care cannot be entirely eliminated from the world, and as long as care and service is being provided, this is something that resists both formal and real forms of subsumption. Yes, care can be farmed out to other people, often immigrants from other poorer countries. And yes, robots can be used in nursing homes to talk to lonely elders, but some level of care will always be required, and it can't be scaled up to an industrial level. I think that's one of Jodi's main points. And she suggests that this is the Achilles heel of neo-feudalism. Here again, many Marxists may have trouble with this message because it sounds like we're abandoning the idea of the proletariat entirely. First of all, if that was the case, it wouldn't be the first time that a Marxist analysis of Marxism would come up with a similar proposition. Fanon notes that in the global south, the urban proletariat are a kind of elite vis-a-vis the masses of peasants and lumpen proletariat that are denied even their minor levels of privilege, making the proletariat a reactionary instead of a revolutionary class in those contexts. But in this case, in Jodi's case, we can still talk of the proletariat in our own time if we conceptually stretch the concept. We can no longer say that the proletariat is the one who does not own the means of production. Anyone with a massage table, a car, an extra apartment, etc., can be formally said to be some kind of capitalist.
They're changing the
So
definition.
it's not that, but rather the fact of not being in control of one's own productive life, of being dependent on another for patronage and support that renders us proletariat. And indeed here too, I think Capital's grave helps us to make sense of the current situation. As Jodi points out, a huge part of resistance today is coming from the service industry, organizing labor at Amazon distribution centers, the teacher strike in the red states in 2018 and 2019, the fight for higher wages in the fast food business. These all suggest what Jody is calling for is already happening. Maybe we should start to say service workers of the world unite. In my own work, I like to speak of archism as the name for the phenomenon that we've been suffering under for the last 500 years. Archism is a system of unprecedented hierarchy involving slavery, genocide, white supremacy, and of course, capitalism. Speaking of archism is helpful, I think, because it allows us to understand how seemingly critical pieces of the world order, such as the state, could actually disappear without a fundamental shift in power dynamics. Up to now, however, I've assumed that capitalism itself was a central aspect of archism, the one piece of it that can't change. But after reading this book, I've been convinced by Jody's analysis that even this piece could be dispensed with potentially. Not entirely, but at least as the dominant mode. What is key, what is at the heart of this system is not any one mechanism, but rather the fact of absolute power and exploitation itself. To me, this is the critical Marxist insight that can be held onto and transferred as we shift from one kind of domination to another. There will always be, at least for a long time, some form of capitalism, but if we hold on it too tenaciously to the past, we will not be able to see the present or the future. What is wonderful about Marxism is that it allows a theory that was cooked up in the 19th century in Western Europe to be applied to contexts all over the world and across a span of centuries. It makes sense to me that such a dynamic system will never rest and never stop changing. So our job is to keep an eye on that change, and I think that Capital's Grave helps us do just that. So let me ask Jody 3 questions just like I did. My first question is about the party. And one thing that Jody and I have never agreed on is the role and the nature of the party. And I don't want to rehash that exactly. But given the enormous changes that have taken place, does it make sense that the party remains at the end of this book the last remnant of a prior age? Jody says that as the symbolic economy founders, we need one little other, let's say, to keep the left from foundering completely into the parcelized bits that neo-feudalism produces. But shouldn't the party itself radically adapt to radically different times?
All the
Should
time.
it not change into a different kind of form that suits a struggle oriented around service and care? If the party remains more or less as it was, does it not risk falling into the same form of unseeing that Capital's Grave ascribes to some of the left more generally? Another way of saying this or asking this is, if the party holds on to a symbolic order that no longer exists, does it risk becoming a relic of the past rather than an avatar of the future? And my second question is actually kind of in the same mode as what Kai was saying, which is really interesting questions about the nature of capitalism and neo-feudalism. It says, does it have to be one or the other? Can capitalism, neo-feudalism, and feudalism just coexist in some sense? Does dialectical theory require us to pick a winner? And will there always be a winner, and why? Or can they all just sort of be there together?
Can we all just do our own thing and, you know?
And then my final question
we all just get
is,
along?
I'd love to hear you say more about what you think revolution would look like in a neo-feudal age, which is also something Kai was talking about.
Yes, please do that.
Or should we draw from revolution, perhaps, revolutions from the feudal order, like the German peasant revolt and the many jacqueries that you found?
What is the revolution? That's a great question.
And here I'm thinking, and I don't want to force you to get into a fight with
I don't even need to be there to ask questions. This is great.
Joshua Clover. But I was thinking of riot, strike, riot, and maybe, is it time for riots anyway? Because if we're neo-feudalist versus feudalist, maybe he was right. So I'm just interested in what you think about that.
Is it time for riots?
Thank you so much for your wonderful book.
San Francisco State instructor. Is it really? Is it time for riots?
Thanks so much, James. I really appreciate it. I think we now go to Phillip.
Phillip!
I want to jump in here. But first, Kai and James, absolutely wonderful contributions with a million questions. I'm trying to decide whether we're in the horror movie where Jody is the scientist who rushes in the door and says, no, the monster we thought we killed, it has these other capacities that we never thought of it. In other words, it's the same monster. Or runs in and says, it's spawned a twin that's something else, and we have to kill that. So I think I agree with Kai totally that the wonderful thing about this book is the way it tracks back and forth between visible changes in our world that everybody registers and theory. And the theory that you get to are precisely the points where theorists have come from totally other directions to deal with some questions in the armature of Marxist theory. For example, stagism, directionality, and the one I wanted to talk about for a second is between formal and real subsumption. Now, I mean, that even starts in Capital, where it's
I wonder if
illustrated
Phillip
in a
keeps
very
his kitchen
simple
like
way.
this every
All of
year
the,
just for Red May to have consistency.
fabrics are weaved
I missed
outside
Phillip's
in these
kitchen.
little huts out in the Scottish Highlands, and the capitalist comes around and takes them in the first stage. Then they move all of the sewing machines into a big factory, and everybody's in a line. And then in the third point, a machine is created that does all of that work and turns all the people into an appendage. The idea being that directionality is to take everything
Phillip's
out
kitchen
of
is
the
hero
outside
of
of the
Red
factory
May,
and put it in
basically.
on the floor, where you suddenly have this grand accumulation of people who discover one another and become this agent that essentially overthrows capitalism.
He did
Well,
clean
as
it.
Jody points out, that didn't happen. And more important, what we discover is there's no hurry to go for the stage from formal subsumption to real subsumption, when you can put out your in one stage to a contractor who you hand a number and a date to, and you basically say, I don't know anything about it. I don't know the conditions in which it's produced. I don't know if the people are being submitted to slavery, or the environments are being totally polluted. That seems to work out better for capital all around. So we now have a situation where we have to revise the theories to some degree to accommodate that. And I would suggest that the thing that we've realized about this monster is it has many more ways to accumulate than we even understand from the first formulation. And the question we have to ask and deal with is, what are the laws of motion of capitalism? What are the things that literally cannot be erased or changed without us ending in a different mode of production? And I think Jody, at some point, even suggests that how value is accumulated may not form part of that particular essential moment. The more essential thing is expanded reproduction and accumulation. The fact that whatever was gained and made is thrown immediately back in production. That's why the same act in feudalism or in capitalism can physically look the same, yet be part of a whole different cycle. So if you think of the algorithm at the bottom of capitalism as MCM prime, or M and then something in between and M prime, where it could be C, or it could be, as Marx puts out, means of production. He can put various elements between the M and the M prime. And he can also
This
say
is way
that
too
the
complicated,
capitalist
Phillip.
is always trying to eliminate those intermediate steps and go directly from M to M prime, which of course causes a crisis in his original vision.
Far too complicated.
So that, to me, is the question that we're kind of asking as we look at all of these new modes. We keep finding that capital, which should die when it does certain things, doesn't automatically die. And then you have people like
Not
Lisa
yet.
Atkins and
Maybe someday.
Martin Koenig, who suggest that
Good question,
instead of
Akshay.
thinking of capital
see you.
as a kind of elastic thing where you keep stretching the accumulation the way value is created to the point where it'll bounce back and have a crisis, maybe capital is plastic, that you can keep bricolaging and adding these new elements to it, and it keeps going on forever until we find a way to find the agent to overthrow it or
Whatever
organize.
it may say.
So I'll put that all in terms of a question.
All the questions
How
have
do
been
we know,
legitimate.
essentially, we do see these new neo-feudal elements, but I think James put this, how do we know that they're not essentially kind of variants of capitalism at the moment? How will we know we're out of it until we get to a point where there's no expanded reproduction. Before that, aren't we still in capitalism, no matter how the particular value is created or sought? That would be my question. And I'll just leave it there because I think Kai and James asked wonderful questions which are worth answering.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Philip. And it's
Red
great
May
for
is
me to
being
see
very
how you all
rude. We've been
the
nothing
same
but polite
questions
to
from
Philip.
different angles basically converge.
There's someone else running
That's
it, though.
that's really
Robert,
interesting because
I
I think it it points to it points to questions that the book raises and maybe raises without
Philip may have had a stroke.
addressing quite.
Last year
quite
was not a
right.
good Philip year.
I first
so
want to make one concession,
sick.
and that's on Kai's second question, saying like, hey, doesn't the Hartunian point conflict with the social manner? I think you're right. I think that I didn't even think of that, right? Because I kind of loved the metaphor of moving from social factory to social manner, but you're absolutely right. It doesn't fit if I'm trying to make a point about the role of full subsumption as a continuously important feature of capitalism, particularly when we're taking a global look and not just going to focus on a Western Marxism preoccupied with real subsumption, right? But that the full subsumption. Wait, it's always good. I did this in the text. I always mess up formal versus real subsumption, right? That your point regarding formal subsumption. And not
all
working
my
with the
questions
social
are
manner.
good.
I think that's I think you're right about
They're being
that.
so rude.
Though I still kind of like the metaphor, but whatever.
So do I.
Theoretically,
I was hoping you would defend it more than that. I like it.
Oh, I like the metaphor, but I think you're right. The only way I would have to I think I could, if I was going to try to defend it, it would be just to put the manor in a context of fighting with other manors and manors surrounded by hinterland. But that's not quite the way the social factory analogy works. So, I mean, you are pointing out like, so I'll actually give you that one. I think.
Okay.
Okay. So I think much of the other line of questioning from all three of you seems to be the coexistence of capitalism and neo-feudalism. When does one fully replace the other? If it's the case that neo-feudalism is dependent on capitalism, isn't that really just capitalism, right? I think that's where one of the places you were starting to end up, Kai, roughly. Is that roughly right? Yeah, from your third question.
Yeah, so it's that, or whether the labor that reproduces neo-feudalism has to be non-capitalistically organized labor. And you do a really good job of explaining that happens in services, or maybe it's happening in services.
Isn't that convenient, though? Isn't that convenient?
That aren't services that are
everyone's now
organized.
a service worker, and so therefore we are headed into feudalism.
Okay. Like, for example, agriculture. But then agriculture is interesting because it's relied on unfree labor even under capitalism, right? It's always actually a feudal component. So there's a way of stretching or pushing the thinking further, so it's not just in services that we're thinking about this. So it's that kind of direction I'm going.
Yeah, I like that very much. I mean, I think you've given me a bunch of ideas for places for expansion and further thinking. That's definitely the case.
That's interesting.
One of the let me try this on one of the questions. Also, if I understood you correctly, Kai, you were suggesting that if the underlying mode is capitalist, then we can't say something about neo-feudalism. It doesn't really quite fully work, or it doesn't work the way that I suggest that it works, because what's being reproduced are capitalists.
Philip is very concerned about
capitalism itself is being reproduced. However, in that long, I use a long quote from Marx that actually I first saw in Jason Smith's book, and it's about Marx when Marx is pointing out about how in the sort of burst of industrial production in England, at the same time that the proletariat's increasing, the sector of workers, or the number of workers employed in unproductive services, is also increasing. And he has a line which is something like, something to the effect of capitalist reproduction is also reproducing something like the historic class of slaves. So what's interesting to me is that capitalist reproduction can also reproduce non-capitalist labor forms.
That doesn't make any sense, Jody.
That is, and so I think that
they're trying to say everyone's
a place.
Service worker, and
So
capitalism makes everyone
that
service
happens.
Worker, so therefore,
that capitalism has also parasitically relied on non-capitalist labor in addition to reproducing non-capitalist labor forms. That both of those things let us think about the coexistence of modes. And if that's the case, I don't think that we have to I don't think that it's exactly the right question right now. Is it the case that if to be neo-feudalism, capitalism has to go away entirely? Or like James is implying, does it become another layer? Right? Or like you were mentioning just now with agriculture and forms of unfree labor in agriculture, that instead of older modes going away, we have different layers. And so that neo-feudalism is a layer of predation and destruction, dependent, and it lets us see different forms of unfreedom that we weren't seeing.
Unfreedom.
And James brought this out in his questions, that we weren't seeing when we didn't have this extra, say, neo-feudal layer on top. I don't know if that's said too kind of crudely, but what I'm trying to do is say that I think it's important for this neo-feudal hypothesis not to claim that capitalism is dead. That strikes me as inaccurate. But I think that the idea that capitalism is not it's not doing what capitalist theory said it was going to do, or like Marx's capitalist theory, it's not doing what it was doing in the kind of heyday of the social welfare state. Neoliberalism was trying to get capitalism to be something much more sort of market oriented and liberalized, but it's not that anymore. There's a different set of actions, but it doesn't mean that it goes away. It means it's in decline in a different way. I don't know if that, I'm afraid that didn't answer very well, but maybe we can go back in the Q&A. One other thing, let's talk about revolution, because James, we always have to talk about the party. And what I want to say is that the party is not an old form, ill-adapted to the present, that in fact, the story of the 20th century is really not a story of successful proletarian revolution as much as it is a story of peasant rebellions and national liberation struggles, often in combination with an industrial workforce and a proletariat. And the party was very well suited for these, in part because it can scale. It goes from a local to an international level. And that's exactly what we need right now. And that perhaps because of the declining position of the industrial workforce in the so-called global north, and the sort of reflexivization of imperialism that we see in neo-feudalism, we're in a better place for building an international anti-imperialism and using a party form to do that. I just don't see how other kinds of political action can scale, right? Like even if you have oh, here, look, our occupation is exchanging selfies with the one in Gaza. Yes, it's inspiring, but that doesn't plan the flotilla, right? That doesn't plan it doesn't plan, drones from, and from Yemen. So I think that we need to think in terms of what is the form that can scale across different struggles. And the party has been a form that does that. I just don't see anyone having offered something other than that, right? There just doesn't seem to be anything other than the party that can operate at the necessary scale. And I think so. The struggle against imperialism is absolutely necessary for the struggle on a warming planet. That's going to be the only way we've got any way of the majority of us to have lives that are not just completely desperate. is where the anti-imperialist struggle is at the center of climate politics, and climate at the center of that. So I don't know, did that at least address somewhat some of the points that y'all were
no,
making?
it's a great point. I mean, I guess my real question is, does the party have to change with the times? Like, it has to take like a different form than it has taken, which would make sense in some ways. And what would that new form be, I guess? And I was also thinking about the other conversation you were just having about whether the distinction between formal and real subsumption actually like, it actually needs to be rethought a little bit, like, because nothing is ever really subsumed, right? Like things stick around, you know, that's what Phillip was saying. So when you say it's real, it's real versus formal, you assume that like something is gone now once it's been really subsumed. But I think capitalism will never be really subsumed either, as long as all this, you know, all this, or real subsumption doesn't maybe mean what we thought it did. It doesn't mean that it's completely something brand new, but something old. And I wonder if that logic also applies to the party. Like, is there like a real change in the party, or at least, you know, obviously some elements will remain, and but something will have to change. And how will the party adapt to this? I'm actually super interested in what you think about that, because you know, I think your idea that like a service-based revolutionary model is key. But I was just wondering what a party that would be working in that with that model, how it would adapt to that as well.
So the book I co-edited with Charisse Burden-Stelly, Organized Fight Win, the writings of Black communist women.
Her agents are here.
Has a number of really great pieces from the first half of the 20th century, from Black women in and around the party organizing domestic workers. And what's so important about this is they're not organized. They have to go out to like the street corners where the women who are they're like day laborers trying to get jobs in households. Right? So it's not like old school union factory organizing, because the people are all spread out. They organize lots of they organize like what is it called, cooperatives that are purchasing goods. They organize tenant unions. They create schools. So already in the old school Communist Party that people kind of love to rag on, there was a whole bunch of different kinds of organizing and strategies that weren't just like versions of union struggles, like at the point of production or looking at industrial workers, but looking at a working class in its lived everyday life. And I think maybe it's holding
because they use the unions to organize, right?
Organizing efforts is also really part of this. And so I would say, like, we've got to stop demonizing the party as if its form was somehow rigid, and recognize that it was always a much more flexible arrangement than people give it credit for being. Also, I understand that you're trying to expand the idea of real subsumption. I kind of think I'm using it in the more kind of narrow way that Marx is using it, which is how how production in factories is really configuring the labor process dramatically, rather than just taking things that are made in their traditional way and now kind of selling them. But in fact, it's reconfiguring them. And as I talk about in the book, the assumption that real subsumption has to occur. And as you point out, actually, in your comments, that one of the things that might be nerve-wracking to Marxists about this book is like, oh no, capitalism never is complete, so we can't get communism.
Yep,
I think that's a really nice point, like as addressing some of that. But anyway, so I just segued into 3 different comments. I see in the. Do you want to read the question here,
please
Phillip,
don't do that. No trolling. No
or?
trolling. Please don't.
Yeah, there are a couple ones. I'll read
Ask
some.
questions from the chat, Phillip.
Can the speakers, this is from Inea,
Come
can
on.
the speakers reflect more on the barriers that the generalized anxiety Jody identified as the 4th characteristic of neo-feudalism pose to revolutionary organizing, and how we confront them?
I don't know if you guys have any comments on that, but what I'll say is I
like that question too, actually.
The party's like this amazing solution to all possible problems, right? That's the but rather than being kind of flip or self-deprecating about it, here's the thing. One of the ways under our kind of current conditions of declining symbolic efficiency, generalized psychosis, and pervasive catastrophic anxiety
Yeah.
is that we end up finding
It's
ourselves
okay, but we never shitpost in their chats. Okay, never.
communities where we
We're
speak
there to
the
ask
same
questions,
language.
but
Communities like
all
this
good,
one,
bro.
like
All
Red
good.
May, where we have a similar or similar enough vocabulary, similar enough calling reference points that we can actually have a conversation and not feel constantly at a loss, constantly at risk. So one of the aspects of the kind of parcelization of the symbolic is I don't know, the small like psychics or socio-psychic fortresses that we need just for being able to speak and think. So in some ways, the party is a if not a solution to generalized anxiety, a way that we cope with it. And our kind of friends and comrades in the in communization theory, generally will want to talk about what historic party rather than the formal party.
Reagan or someone else that's not me, can you ask them very, very nicely, can you explain a little bit more how you see revolution playing out? Like, how do we get from here to the Marxist utopia?
Side, right? That provides at least some way of grappling with the generalized anxiety that we face. But it also, and I think Ina's question, points to this. I mean, it also then points to limits to it, right? I mean, it's not universalizable. That's one of the things that we come up against. But I actually think that the characteristic of neo-feudalism is division all the way down in a fight.
Only one person needs to ask that, please.
We don't have, we're not in a setting where a message that's going to be immediately universalizable is plausible because we don't even speak a language that makes it plausible. It could be
cool.
That,
Thank you, Reagan.
I was
Appreciate
pointing
you.
to the basically the fires and the ecological crisis. And I think one of the questions is, will the crisis create conditions of commonality, right? Will survivability create a point for common alliance, or is it going to be no? It's going to continue to intensify the divisions. All evidence right now says it's going to continue to intensify the divisions, the fortress mentality. So that means we have to strengthen our side, even if that means sort of a kind of slow and steady expansion of our borders to try to bring more people in. But I don't think it's like something like you just get the right message out and everybody's anxiety falls away, right? That's also part of the struggle.
I have two things if I can, if that's all right. I'm bringing up the party again because why not? We should do this. But one of the things, James, your question made me think about, reminded me of when I was reading the book. We get to the end and was about the struggle comes out of the hinterlands, right? And what late Joshua Clover would have called circulation struggles, actually, right? But the difference there with Jody is that you need the party. So I was like, aha, that's where the party goes. The party goes to the hinterlands. And then we have a kind of Maoist organization of the party where it's like the hinterlands surround the metropole, because traditionally parties were metropolitan, urban. So maybe one thing it made me think was, okay, under neo-feudal conditions, the party needs to go to hinterlands, and that's where that struggle, that's a major difference. So, just in terms of actually organizing, not conceptually, that's a major difference and a challenge, but very exciting and interesting to think about. The anxiety thing, anxiety can be awful, and a paralyzing condition, but like in the Lacanian psychoanalysis, anxiety exists to tell you the truth of a situation. It's not just a feeling, right? It's you hit on the real and on the essential, which means anxiety in a strange way is also productive. So I would like to pivot that around a bit and say this actually, I cannot imagine it being a revolution where people weren't anxious about it's going to be there, right? So I think there's something quite already universalizing. If anxiety is produced by neo-feudalism as a general sense, then in a way that's a step forward as well.
I can't control their audio, Kansas.
I would say one thing about the party, which is sometimes people get too nuts and bolts about organizing or thinking about it, instead of asking the important general question, which is, when does the party become an instrument for collective thought, actual thought, and when does it become an instrument to stop thought? You could do an anthology where you look through all the parties in history And you said at this point they are thinking about the current moment, and which is obviously the Bolsheviks in the fourth or five months before the October Revolution, where the quality of the thought and the exchange is great. And there are other points where people are just handed a line that's stupid and are kind of forced to follow it. And it's obviously the second image of the party that has triumphed thanks to American film and television for a long time. So one has to figure out how do you literally create a party where it uses the advantage of many minds to find the right thing to do at any given moment. I'm going to read.
Can I say one thing first, Philip?
Yes, James.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
Can I say one thing quickly too?
Yes.
I was just going to talk about this idea of anxiety too, because I think Kai hit it right on the head. Like, anxiety is actually a good thing. And I think if I was going to make one change from your book, Jody, if I was going to rewrite it, it would be that we've been neo-feudal for a long time. And I think the anxiety is, and to use this in Lacanian terms, that's what's really going on. And we all kind of have known it for a long time, but we haven't wanted to admit it. Now it's becoming too obvious to not acknowledge it. So I think actually we're coming to a place where anxiety is going to become productive instead of paralyzing. And that's a good thing. And I want to write a book someday called Shitty Liberals, because we're just amongst ourselves, lefties right now.
You're just amongst yourselves.
It's increasingly impossible to. I think the anxiety is really mostly among liberals, and especially among people who say they're leftists but are secretly liberals. I think that stance is going to be increasingly impossible to hold as things become more clarified. And I think this is. I actually want your thesis to be correct. Because I think we're going to be stuck with shitty liberals forever if we just have capitalism as we've understood it. But I think with this new way of understanding it, they can't do that anymore, because they're going to end up being vassals. They are vassals, but they're going to end up being even worse vassals. So they're going to lose their privilege. It reminds me of Winston Churchill. He says, I think I might have said this to you already, Jody, once before. He says, he was talking about how the appeasement of Hitler by Chamberlain. He said, you had a choice between dishonor and war. You chose dishonor, and now you shall have war. That's what all the shitty liberals are like right now. They're picking dishonor. They're going to get fucked over anyway. So might as well fight.
So
you know?
true,
And I think
James.
this is a great time for organizing communism.
So true. So true.
Yeah. Okay, quickly. Alan asks, where can you buy Jody's book?
No one
Elliott
asked
Bay
that, Philip.
Book Company.
Literally,
and you should go there
no
and
one
buy it
asked
right
that,
away.
Philip.
It's a great book. Next question.
Deflecting
There
the
it is.
question. That's a cool
And a
cover,
wonderful
actually.
design on the cover. by
That is
the way.
actually a great cover design. I really like that a lot.
Let's see. Digital Gnosis says, I think there are pretty universalizable languages. Love, self-sacrifice. Though I guess even there you see the
Reagan asked a question, Philip. It's very
co-opting the
rude
Jesus
for you to
story
ignore
and
Reagan's
theology,
question. It was a
and
good
that language
question.
for the opposite. There's no question there, but it's a comment. Okay. I'm going through these very quickly to see if we can get one more.
Reagan,
Can you
Reagan.
explain a little more how you see revolution playing out? This is from Reagan. How can we get from where we are now to
Win.
be closer
Reagan W.
to the Marxist utopia? I don't like those last two phrases as a description, but I know what you're talking about, so we'll deal with it. Jody,
Okay.
Reagan, a Philip interaction.
You know, I have to say, I have to resort to some of the old-fashioned Marxist language of here as like, you know, we don't have crystal balls. We can't predict exactly what the future is going to bring. Lenin is the best on, you know, when is a revolution? A revolution is when the working class or the lower class won't go on anymore, and the ruling class can't go on anymore. And you've got to have both. It's only then that a revolution can triumph. The working class won't go on, the upper class can't go on. And you know, how do we get our communist utopia? I mean, it's going to be hard work, right? It's going to be hard work, discipline, cooperation, and, you know, not quick fixes. I mean, those aren't super happy answers, but I think they put us back into a world where what our tasks are right now are, you know, figuring out our analysis in the present, figuring out how are we going to organize in the present, and all the questions that, you know, Kai, James, and Phillip are rightly pushing us to consider. Like, all of them also add up to questions of like, so how do you sustain a struggle if we still are dependent on commodities and wages, which is true, right? No one said that like as sort of abruptly or meanly to me, but that's part's true. The majority of us have to buy things that we need to sustain ourselves. So we've got a level of dependence on markets that, in fact, the peasant revolutions didn't have, because they had their own means of subsistence. We're going to have problems of means of subsistence. That's a real thing. Under a warming planet, on a warming planet, that's going to be a real thing. So those, I think, are you know, then the strategies for dealing. You talk about this a lot in your work, Kai, is figuring out the relation between, you know, having what we need to survive and fighting the struggles, and how do you find forms. And you actually, James, you've been thinking about these forms too, that are bringing together our forms of fighting, our forms of decision-making, deliberation, and our forms of subsistence, right? What are going to be the ways to bring those things together? And maybe that's actually what you're pushing me on, James, when you're like, shouldn't the party adapt in some ways? And I think, you know, sort of yes and no. You know, is this, instead of the party being one thing, I mean, instead of the party being all three of these things, maybe you need three intertwined sets of sort of processes and activities, and you don't expect the party to do all of them. You also don't expect your mutual aid to do all of them. It doesn't, that you have a party doesn't mean you don't need mutual aid, and so on. So back to the question, like, you know, how will we get our Marxist utopia? By abolishing private property and private ownership in the means of production, keeping fossil fuels in the ground, having communities where everyone treats each other with a degree of dignity and respect, and people who want to get to participate in the primary decision making. I think that would be a good start. And then one other thing that's not on this question, Kyle, I loved your responses earlier. I wish I'd said them about and you also amplified them, James, on anxiety is productive. Yeah, that seems I really like that. And of course, surround the cities.
Yeah. As much as I'd love to read Ernest Bloch and think about utopia, I think the phrase Marxist utopia is too close to the liberal trope of the 50s, where the left is supposed to want to create heaven on earth, which of course is ridiculous. I think the notion of what drives the left should be, and is, very simple. It's I can't breathe. George Floyd's words. People want to breathe and they can't, because capitalism doesn't allow most of them to do it.
You seem
One
to
doesn't
be
have to get more complicated than that. Let me go with another question from Sean here. Not our Sean, who's works on Redmay, but another Sean. Jody was talking about non-party based organization and efforts aren't able to offer scalable actions like the flotilla or Yemeni drone strikes. Are these actually examples that leftist parties did or organized? The drone strikes and the flotilla, I guess that.
I mean, the drone strikes. Yeah. I mean, Yemen is Ansar Allah is a socialist military organization. And the flotilla is not a party, but it is an interest. I think it's interesting to think about as a larger scale kind of organizing. So it's not a party. That's right.
I guess.
Yes, Ty?
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about the last question as well, right? The Marxist utopia thing is nonsense. But what the Neo-Feudalism book does very well is press the need to think about our reproduction. So capitalism is failing to reproduce as day to day. Our bills are going higher and higher. The cost of living is higher and higher. People are living less long lives. You know, we're getting shittier and more miserable. And Neo-Feudalism isn't going to fix that problem. So the struggle becomes about how to seize control of our means of kind of collective reproduction and sustain each other's lives, right? And what is Yemen doing? Trying to keep people alive in Palestine against the genocide. What's the flotilla doing? Struggling over reproduction as well of Palestine and Palestinian people. So in that sense, yeah, they're a fight over our collective reproduction. They're part of the same struggle that we're trying to do, I think.
Let's take one last question here. It's a comment, but it would be interesting to hear what people elaborated a bit. A lot of people, this is from Digital Gnosis, a lot of people's anxiety comes from being manipulated by engagement, algorithm / news, climate change, wars, etc. The role of the media in creating catastrophic anxiety, I guess that's a large subject, but it'd be interesting to hear if anybody has a comment on that.
I have a couple of things. One, going to try to remain in keeping with Kai and James' emphasis on the productive anxiety. Sure, the images of burning Palestinian tents, and dead Palestinian children, and demolished cities that have been going through our feeds, for over 500 days, create incredible amounts of catastrophism, fear, anxiety, and despair. But without them, we wouldn't have a sense of the reality of the world and a willingness to fight to change it. And that's crucial, right? Like so the same things that can fill us with a kind of overwhelming anxiety can also push us in other directions. So that's the first thing. I think a lot of it, so the second thing is, like, stuff depends on the kinds of media one consumes, and to go in keeping with James' shitty liberals, the primarily liberal media, I think, wants us, everything is supposed to be that we consume primarily incapacitating or directing us back into the Democratic Party. It wants to take every bit of righteous rage, of a willingness to fight back, of a sense of we can't take it anymore and we have to band together and say, oh, and the way you do this next year is vote. Right. That was actually one of the things that was so deeply frustrating in some of the local nearby George Floyd protest in 2020. We'd be out there, everyone's in like gas mask, and there's been hand to hand with police and all this. And at the end, some of the organizers were like, and you know what this means? Everyone needs to make sure they register to vote. And it's like, what the hell are you talking about? So I think in some ways, yes, media is a problem, but one can make choices to, participate in forms of red media and left media and find sources that are going to actually help you think and feel part of a collective that wants to fight back, or whether you're just going to consume stuff that lets you either escape or be in despair.
Can I add to that too? Because I think that's a really good point. I think one of the reasons that that Palestine and Gaza has had such a huge impact on the way we're thinking is that if you think about the way the chickens are coming home to roost, that could be our future. Like, there's no reason why that kind of death and war wouldn't be rained on us too eventually. And we think we could, we have privilege because we're in the United States or whatever, but that's not going to always be true. And I think that's one of your central theses, and that's something we should really think about. Another thing that you said in your book that really gave me pause, which I thought was very smart, was that a lot of the leftists engage in these kind of fantasies. And I guess this is what a utopia, I don't like utopia either, because it means nowhere. And I'm like, fuck that. But so you're talking about like us all becoming subsistence farmers. And what you're basically saying is our fantasy of liberation is to become feudal again, right? And I have to admit that I've sometimes thought that way myself. So I kind of like the way that you're allowing us to have a little bit more of the industrial world, and not have to resort to that kind of lifestyle, because I think a lot of neo-feudalists, like the techno lords, would be like, that sounds great. Yeah, you guys go be subsistence farmers, and we'll like tax you and oppress you. So I think that's very. I thought that was a very nice and helpful thought that you had too.
Yes, the hinterlandization chapter is quite good. Well, I could enjoy talking with these people for another few hours, but alas, we do have to get off.
Oh no, Phillip!
I do want to say that if you like what we do and want us to do our 10th anniversary Red May next year, where we're trying to gather money for it, go to redmayseattle.org. You can donate there, or go to our Patreon. We do not accept money from governments or foundations. So we're somewhat immune to anything except being kidnapped by the Trump Gestapo and so forth. But in terms of cutting off our funds, there aren't any to cut off. And I don't think we have a lot of billionaire donors. So please be generous, reach into your pockets, and look at our schedule. We are, God, I don't even know what's up next, but it's on the website. We do have a wonderful move. Well, no, that's local. We have someone just posted in the chat, we love Red May, blah, blah, blah. So, okay. Well, I will say goodbye now and beg you to go online.
He didn't want to
promise
say my
to
name.
be more informed about what we're showing next, what's local and what's going to be filmed online. So hopefully we'll see you later. And thank
Bye,
you, Jody.
Phillip.
Thank you, Kai.
Bye.
James, thanks. And I hope we will have you back to lots of Red Mays.
Oh, you will.
And
you will.
Jody, good luck on your
Say my name,
tour, reading the wonderful book, which I feel a certain proprietorship for, because I remember the panel we had 3 years ago with Jason Reed or something. I'm sure Jason would organize something in Maine if you wanted to go up there and read there and have him again. I think it would be great. Thanks, everybody, and have a good day. The weather's great in Seattle. I hope it is where you are. Bye-bye.
Bye, Phillip.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. We're done. We're done. Yeah, I mean, today, I think it was that Trotsky looking guy that we saw for like a second, Robert, that was doing that. And I was like, we're agent? I have agents? I had no idea I had agents. Okay, I think that was a highly successful first talk of Red May. I have to say, I'm a little disappointed with Phillip, and I think Robert, who is helping Phillip, who looks like Trotsky. I'm a little disappointed that they were so quick to dismiss my questions as trolls, because every single question I asked was related to something that was said. Every single question I asked was actually legitimate. I actually did want them to answer that question. And I think it's really too bad. I think it's really too bad when communists can't answer very simple, very respectful questions about what they're doing. I didn't troll their chat. In fact, I went out of my way to tell people, don't troll their chat. We're only there to listen and ask questions. Even when someone from my chat who was new, and so we forgive him, they don't know. Even when someone from my chat went over there to shitpost, I was like, no, we don't do that. So I was nothing but respectful and nice, and Red May called me a troll. I really think that Red May should be more grateful to me, because I am elevating their content to more people. And we're going to be there whether they like it or not, because the internet is a public place and they might ban me from their chat. I don't know why they would. I was perfectly nice. I said I miss Phillip. I said I'm looking forward to Red May. I said I thought Red May was, what do these people want from me? I even said I agree with them on Israel. Like, I just don't know what these people want from me. Can't just get along, can't just have a nice conversation, can't just, whatever. But you know what? That's okay. That's okay. Maybe they'll come around, because we do have a long month to go in Red May. And I have to say, I do think that Phillip has put together quite a schedule for us. So we just did Capitalism's Grave. And then our next one, Friday, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this one live, because we have a spy stream on Friday. So spy stream will take priority over Red May. So I don't know if we're going to be able to do that one. So Phillip gets a day off on that one. And then, look, we've got something about tech on Tuesday. Grief and Revolution in a World on Fire again on Friday. Sarah Jaffe. I actually want to see Sarah Jaffe. So that's actually one we might do. I don't know we're not watching the one about the poetry. I fucking hate poetry. Tuesday, May 20th, the West and the Rest, Capital and Power in a Multipolar World. That one looks great. So Red May is very generously putting together a whole socialism schedule for us for the month of May. And so expect to see a lot of Red May. No, what I would do, I'm not going to use another name. What I would do is just ask someone in my chat to go ask them a question. If I'm actually, like, just like we did today, like, I actually wanted that question answered. And so I asked Reagan to go ask it because they weren't going to answer it if I asked it, but they did answer it if Reagan asked it. So I have, there's a method to my madness, Kansas Mama. I've been doing this for a long ass time. Okay. I know what I'm doing. If I am chatting in as myself, it's for a specific purpose. It's because I want them to know I'm there. I want them to know I'm watching. I want them to know I'm streaming. And I also want to come across as perfectly polite in the chat so that there ain't shit they can do about it. Because honestly, if they ban me when I'm just like being, hey, I really like what you're doing. I think this is great. Thanks so much for doing this. Can you please answer this question? This is a really good question. I'm curious. Like, they actually look awful if they do anything to me. So I kind of like that. I like being, I'm a troll in that aspect, in that I'm not going to go in and shitpost in your chat or cause disruption. I'm just going to stand there and look at you so that you know that I'm there. And oftentimes what I find with the left is literally me just standing there looking at them so that they know I'm there, like overtly. And I'm like, hey, Phillip, hey, good to see you, bro. That's enough. That triggers them and they start to spiral in their heads. So a lot of the time, I used to talk about this more. Psychological fuckery is very, very, very simple. A lot of people go overt. They think they need to hit you in the face. They think they need to be loud and disruptive and cause problems. No. That is a kindergarten level of psychological fuckery. Real psychological fuckery comes when you understand that you literally just need to stand there and look at someone in the right way, and it plants a seed in their head. And then they're the ones that start to obsess at it and think about it. And they're like, I don't like that she's looking at me. I don't like that she's looking at me. It's kind of like I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not. And it drives them fucking nuts. And then they say things like, she sent her agents into our chat. It's like, okay. Anyway, guys, we are going to be doing Socialism Saturday tonight. I do have, I'll pull up the documentary that I have. Hang on. I have got a couple things picked out for tonight. We're going to be learning about Emma Goldman tonight because honestly, I have not done my due diligence on Emma Goldman. I know of Emma Goldman in that Emma Goldman is really the only major woman involved in like the original creation of communism that I know of, because the rest of it was created by Jewish men. Now, Emma Goldman is a Jewish woman. And you know what I found out? I actually found when I was researching for the documentary to watch for tonight, I actually found a whole video about Emma Goldman on the American Jewish Historical Society. So I thought that was actually pretty funny that the American Jewish Historical Society had a whole video on Emma Goldman. I was like, I'm not going to say that communism is Jewish just because Lenin was Jewish and Marx was Jewish and Trotsky was Jewish and basically every intellectual at the Frankfurt School. I'm not going to say they're all Jewish, but they kind of are all Jewish. And that's just a pure coincidence. We love Jews on this channel. We love bagels. We accept no anti-Semitism allowed. But like, I just thought that was funny. But we're going to be watching this documentary, Emma Goldman, an exceedingly dangerous woman. I don't know anything about any of this or if this is even good, but this was the documentary that I found. If you have a documentary about Emma Goldman that is publicly available that you want us to check out tonight, let me know, because I'm still open to, changing it up, maybe even watching a second documentary. We can always watch more than one. And so that is what we're going to be doing at 6 p.m. We did our hard socialism just now because, like I told you guys, Red May is very, very wonky. It's much more academic than a lot of the socialists we watch. And so we just ate our vegetables. Everyone that came, congratulations. Now tonight at 6 p.m. in about 2 hours, we're going to do our normal episode of Socialism Saturday, where we're going to have our desserts and we're going to learn about Emma Goldman. And that is what we're going to do. In the meantime, guys, if you want to support the work I'm doing, of course, always head over to the Substack. That is Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. We're doing a membership drive between now and the end of the summer. I'm trying to get 400 new paying members on my Substack. So if you are not yet a paying member of my Substack, I would love to earn your support today. You guys are the ones that allow me to do all this stuff, spend all the time researching, spend all the time infiltrating leftist training so I can bring you amazing clips, just like I did last night. Vermont public schools openly defying the Trump administration's executive orders. They're saying flat out they're not going to follow them, and Trump can F off. And so I recorded that in a private training yesterday. Well, it was anyone in the public could register. So, technically it was public, but it was only sent out to people who registered. Anyway, I got them on video literally yesterday saying they're not going to obey Trump's executive orders. I have more clips coming out from that training soon. And one of the benefits you get as a supporter of my work is you get access to future spy streams. So spy stream is when we go inside a live leftist training. They don't know that we're watching. They don't know that we're listening. And we watch them and we listen to them and we see what they say behind closed doors. Our next spy stream is on Monday. We also have one coming up on Friday. Who knows what else might pop up during the middle of the week? There seems to be a lot of leftist organizing going on right now, a lot of spy streams, a lot of different things happening. And so we might, a spy stream, I'm anticipating being a staple of the summer, to be honest, just because there's a ton of leftist organizing going on around Trump. So if you want to come to Spy Stream and support the work I'm doing and get access to the Discord and get access to private unrecorded Zoom calls with me, head over to the Substack, sign up for $8 a month, $80 a year. And that is how you guys keep me in business. And you guys allow me to do this. And I really, really do appreciate it. Guys, I'm going to go take a break for a couple hours. It just started raining really hard, which I'm not upset about because it's really effing hot out. Anyway, I'm going to go take a break for a couple hours. I'll be back at 6 p.m. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Give me some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that? I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.